Okay, and I'll just share my screen once again. I don't think it's too much of a worry. I've probably got around half an hour's worth of content, and then I was going to leave it open to questions to keep this interactive towards the end. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. By way of introduction, my name's Tom. I'm a technical solutions architect within Cisco. I sit on the Meraki side of the house. Been in this role for coming up to 5 years. I primarily look after central government and defence for Meraki. Looking after all of the major departments, but also did a lot of work a few years ago with the likes of Welsh Government for the schools expansion and digital transformation project that they undertook. So I've had the pleasure of spending quite a lot of time in the wonderful Wales. I'm based here in the middle of England, currently quite snowy. I don't know what it's like over there, but unfortunately I haven't had much chance to get over to Wales this year, but I'm hopeful next year I'll be able to take some time out and go on holiday. I do like it over there. So today I want to talk about a few things, and Kiki asked me to do this, and I hope this is going to be useful for you. I'm more than happy to kind of do any follow-ups if you want to go into even more detail on anything specifically or individual circumstances or integrations that you might be working with. But I want to keep it quite high level today just to kind of kick off the conversation. So I want to run through a few things. So first of all, just a refresher of the Meraki platform, because it kind of sets the scene of the rest of the conversation I want to have. It all kind of ties back to the centralized platform that we call Dashboard. And then I'm go through some best practices around security. It's always obviously a good idea to have a good security posture, but we've made a few enhancements recently, and we'll make even more going forward, specifically around what we call RBAC, which is role-based access control. So this is allowing you, as you'll see, to change and add different types of users or administrators into Dashboard and give them access to different points of data or networks to allow them to extrapolate that data or just get a view of what's going on. And then we'll look at the analytics that are built into Dashboard, and hopefully, you might be familiar with some of this already, and you might be able to infer some kind of use cases around this, but I will talk around what some of our customers have done in sort of everything from kind of retail settings to kind of office-based deployments. And it is kind of an interesting customer base that I have, because I look after, as well as the big departments, what also falls under my jurisdiction is things like museums in the UK, right? So they have kind of a more retail side, some really large footprints such as the Natural History Museum, but in the past I've also, in more of a commercial role, worked with people like or organisations like the Camden Council and Camden Market, who have rolled out Meraki technology to get a view of, how users are kind of interacting with their environment. So whether that be from a retail perspective, they're looking to kind of capture data about how many people are in a certain area, but right down to the kind of foot flow and journey that customer goes on, right? So we're able to identify and extrapolate from the data that we get from the Meraki kit and technology. We can infer all of this detail, and you can use that in your own environments. And then I want to talk about the API finally. And this may be something you guys are using, you may be aware of, or you might have no idea what this is, right? But I want to share with you how this can kind of take it to the next level, because we show you so much in Dashboard, but there has to be a point where we stop, okay? Because we can't, Meraki as a whole is mostly around simplicity, and we can't address everybody's use case in the one single dashboard, right? So what we now do and have been doing over the past couple of years is we now treat API as a product, and I'll go into the details of what exactly the API is if you're not familiar later on. But what that means is that every piece of information that you can see, or every item that you can touch or configure in dashboard, you should be able to get that information out of the Meraki dashboard via API and plug it into your own systems, or integrations with like third parties, which I'll come on to later, as many customers have done. So let's start briefly with the platform overview. You're probably all familiar with this kind of being Meraki users. But we have a whole suite of products, and the backstory of Meraki, founded in 2006, acquired by Cisco in 2012, and we built the cloud managed product set within Cisco. Okay, so we have everything from wireless switching, security, to mobile device management. Even now, we moved into the IoT space a few years ago, and our latest product, which are the environmental sensors, are a very fast ramping product, but as we'll see and come on to in a couple of the use cases later on. But we're seeing these deployed in many different types of environments, as well as the cameras, right? So we see things like the cameras now as not just like a physical CCTV style deployment. The cameras are actually now being used in a lot of environments with the recording turned off, and they're just being used as a sensor. So what can we do with that type of data? Well, if we think about an office environment, going back 18 months, 2 years or so, well, not even that, but when we were talking about the safe return to work for COVID, a lot of the central government departments and enterprise organizations were using cameras to monitor things like social distancing, right? And God forbid that we end up in a situation like that again. But we can now at least say that a lot of organizations have this, have the ability now to very quickly spin up a policy where we can monitor things like social distancing. But in a retail space, this can be used alongside things like the wireless access points that you'll be familiar with to further enhance that data. So if we think about one of the potential drawbacks, and obviously there's ways of getting around this, but when we are using things like wireless access points to measure data, is that people have more than one device typically. We're now seeing, I think it's 2.9 devices on average per person, right? So that's a phone, iPad, Apple Watch, Android phone, whatever it may be, laptop, all of those devices. So there has to be some kind of averaging algorithm that is done, and that's something we do in dashboard, but you can also apply that to your own applications as well. But that's one thing that cameras can really help with, right? So if you're gathering data from an access point and a camera, obviously a camera can pick up and detect what is a person, and an access point is obviously picking up devices. So the two work hand in hand quite nicely together. As I already touched on, Meraki is all around the cloud first operations, right? And this allows us to enable customers to recognize times of value. And obviously, you've got all these deployments, all these solutions that have already been deployed. But we really want to make sure that for every new feature that we're bringing out or enabling dashboard, that you can use that and get that up and running very, very quickly. This also helps with things like security. Okay, so we can obviously automate firmware upgrades. We do pen testing on our own environments, as well as to our own individual nodes, right? So that allows us to make sure that customer security is at the heart of everything we do. And obviously, well, hopefully you'll be aware this allows us to also do the zero touch provisioning. So if you were to go down a route of kind of expanding your footprint, it's a very, very easy thing to do. You order the devices from Meraki, you can plug them in, claim them into your dashboard, and you can start gathering that data that you're interested in or serving clients within just a few minutes. And I might touch on this later on around the API, right? But this at scale, right? We utilizing the API and automation, right? We're able to have customers deploying tens of thousands of devices in a very short amount of time. There was a use case that came out of one of my colleagues' customers, and they had across the globe, they had something like 1,200 sites. And they were able to configure all of their dashboard, configure all of the kit in under 9 minutes using automation, and therefore they just had to ship all the kit to site. It was plugged in, and therefore came online, pulled the configuration from dashboard, and the clients were able to connect. And that was part of a kind of global system upgrade, and that not only kind of allowed a smaller change window. They're able to do this kind of just overnight in a lot of circumstances, right, into these business critical environments. But if you think about some of the cost savings, hidden cost savings that are associated with that, it kind of compounds quite greatly. And just to give you some idea of scale before I jump into some of the meat of the talk here, I always like to show kind of an update slide no matter what the context, just to give you an idea of what scale we're operating at now. And these numbers are a few months old now, so I'm sure that they've changed in terms of the number of customers and devices. But some of the call outs here, we have 11 million devices that are online. So that's not 11 million devices sold. That's the number of devices that are online and checking into dashboard now. 190 countries we're in. It's over 4 million customer networks now. We crossed over that milestone around a month ago. And the number of devices that we're seeing daily is closer to the 200 million mark now. So this gives you some idea of the scale that Meraki as a whole is operating at. So I want to talk about the securing the access to dashboard. And I created a little video for this. So I'm going to walk you through what this is doing here. But as I said earlier, this is around making sure that you have the correct security policy in place for all of the users in dashboard. Okay, so very often, or I'll say very often, quite often I come across customers that have had either administrators leave, or they might have assigned incorrect permissions to a more junior IT admin or just a junior individual, or they might have assigned administrative privileges, i.e. write privileges to all of the administrators, where some might not even be technical, or even know what they're doing in dashboard, which is obviously a risk. So I want to make sure, and I'll share some resources after this as well as sharing the slides, but I want to make sure as we go through this, your correct security policy is in place. So what I'm doing here, and I'll pause the video, is I've gone into organization and administrators. Now, it's important to realize that a couple of things in dashboard. Okay, so we have the notion of organizations, and we have networks. So networks are typically sites. Okay, so I'm not sure how your individual deployments are set up. It could just be one giant network, or it could be multiple networks. Now, no matter how it's set up, you can have different types of administrators. And I'm showing you this on purpose on my home organization here. As you can see, there's just a few in the background, a few on my own, and then my kind of brother-in-law and my father there for his individual network. So what I'm showing you is I've clicked on one of my accounts. Okay, and as we go through this, I'm going to change some of the permissions. So you can see that by default, it was set as a full organization administrator. Now I've changed that, if I pause and go back, sorry. Now I've changed that here to a read-only administrator. Now that's pretty self-explanatory, right, in terms of what it allows you to do. So that user will be able to log in, and they'll be able to go into all of the individual menus and submenus, but they won't be able to make any changes. So if you have an administrator that is just interested, or their sole purpose should just be looking at the analytics section in dashboard, for example, a read-only administrator is a great way to do that. We can further go in and subcategorize users and what they can get access to under the privileges section underneath here. Right, so you can see that I'm selecting a target, and I'm selecting an individual network under that target. And again, you can get a little more granular, because what you could do is say that this individual is a read-only organization admin, but they have full access to a specific network. So you can get quite granular, and you can assign this as many targets as your organization have, and target again is a network. And if you had cameras in your network here, you could even provide, you can even update the camera permissions on this as well, right? So you might want to allow access to some footage to some users, or not permit them to view or export footage in certain different scenarios. So it's as simple as that. We can also, if for more advanced kind of use cases, we can integrate with kind of single sign-on, SAML, LDAP, to further enhance this kind of onboarding experience. And one thing I mentioned earlier is when individuals leave, right? So that's leave an organization. So that's a potential risk for individuals to come back in. We've seen it happen before, not at Cisco. I've seen it happen in partner landscapes before. We've had kind of disgruntled employees come back and try to make changes. What I will say here is that everything in the dashboard is logged. Okay, so whether that's a user logging in or whether that's a user making a change, everything's logged, timestamped. And one of the things you'll be able to do in the future, if a change is made and that change is disruptive, or it was a mistake, or God forbid, malicious, you'll be able to go in and revert that change. Okay, so at the moment, that's a manual process. So what we have in dashboard is we have a change log where you go in and it will show you what users made a particular change, and what it was affecting, whether it's configuration change on an access point, for example. And you'll be able to go in and kind of do the reverse of that. In the future, that will be automated as part of our AI and machine learning progress here. Okay, so I'm going to jump into dashboard now, actually, and do a little bit of a demo on some of the analytics features that are built into dashboard. So I'm logged into our live environment. So this is our Meraki corporate network. And I'm currently looking at the Finsbury Square network, which is my quote unquote local office in London, right? So we have location analytics enabled, okay? And there's several optimizations we can do to that. So we can have a look at the IoT radio settings, for example. Now, what this will allow you to do is enable whether you want that dedicated scanning radio turned on in your access point. Now, we've got this enabled, okay, and by default, well, by default it's off. But if you want to gather any of the data that I'm going to show you, it's best to have this on, okay? So I'm going to jump into the location analytics menu here, and hopefully this is something that you've seen before. Now, this is going to show you all kinds of information in here. We can have a look over the past week, day, or month, or even specify a custom range. Okay, now this is an office environment, so the numbers are not going to be the same. But what you can see is, due to the location of the office in central London, we get a lot of passers-by. But you can see the discrepancies in here between visitors connected and passers-by. Now, visitors are people that come into the office but don't connect to the Wi-Fi. Connected are individuals that are connected to the Wi-Fi, and passers-by are just that. So we've seen them, okay? We've seen a wireless probe or a BLE beacon come from an individual's device or devices, and we log that here on dashboard. And we can have a look at this over time. So if we look at the last month, for example, we can see those numbers change slightly. And if we look at the last day, we can see those numbers change. Now, as I said, you could just come in and export this via CSV, right? So we can open this. If you wanted to just submit a report, you can very easily do that. And you can see this is timestamped here. Okay, so this here looks like it's in kind of hour increments. So we can see that there's 11 devices that were connected between midnight and 1 a.m. Okay, and that's likely to be sensors, cameras, and things that stay in the office. Obviously, there's not many individuals in there at that particular time. But we could do the same for the last week or the last month. Okay, engagement here is pretty self-explanatory as well. So how long do these individuals stay in a certain environment? So we can see that there's 6 hours, 1 to 6 hours, 20 to 60 minutes, and 5 to 20 minutes. And you can see that a lot of those will be the kind of passers-by, right? But the 6+ hours are likely to be the devices of the employees that are currently in the office, that or have been in the office over the past week. And then the loyalty is like the retention, okay? So we can see that the weekly retention and daily retention, if we were in an office environment, would be the ones that we were looking at. But you can see some of the statistics that will be useful in more of a, in perhaps more of your use case, right? So for the first time and occasional usage. And again, I'll come on to how we can export this data and show you some examples of that. But that can all be exported via the API. Now, the other useful thing that is natively in dashboard that you can go and configure by default is this location heat map. And this is things, one of the things that I was speaking at one of the museums, this is something that they use just to kind of get an idea of where clients are distributed. So you can, as you can see here, this is a Google Maps, but you could also upload your own floor plan, right? So if I select one of the floor plans here, you can see you could upload your own floor plan and drop the APs onto it. It's kind of a drag and drop. So if you had obviously maybe a more of an outdoor environment, you could come in and you would just have to drop your access points onto where they are in relative to the location. So if I go back to what we were looking at before here, we can see these are the access points highlighted in blue. And we can see the distribution of clients. Now, I know this office quite well, right? So I know that this particular area is where the majority of the seating is, okay? But what you'll see is we can use this timeline at the top, or we could change the time frame here, and we can see it more of a median of the devices, right? So, and I know, for example, down here, this is more where the cafeteria area is. So we could go in and start to use this timeline to look at where clients are at certain times of the day, right? So as we see, so this is 10 p.m. So again, you've seen as you can tell by the color coding, there's less density in terms of the clients. And if we look, okay, yesterday was a weekend, so that's not a great example, but if we start to look at from sort of 8 a.m., 9 a.m., when people start to come in the office, this is where the devices start to ramp up. And you can see all of these dots here, as you can see by the legend in the bottom left-hand corner, different colors will show you different things. So we can see BLE, which is Bluetooth. Okay, so devices have Bluetooth built into them, but also standalone BLE clients such as IoT sensors and things like that. And then we can see unassociated and associated clients. So we see the dark blue ones here associated. And what is worth noting here, right, is BLE is far more accurate in terms of pinpointing location than Wi-Fi triangulation is. Now, what we do from a Wi-Fi location, from a Wi-Fi location perspective, is we will infer a client's location based on triangulation between 3 APs. So what does that mean? So, or three, well, it's technically one or more APs, but generally if you've got more than one AP, we do it off 3. So we take the RSSI measurement, so saying the signal strength that we are seeing between 3 APs from a particular device. And then we are using that data to plot a point on this map, as you can see here. So for this one, this dark purple one that I've got my cursor over here, we're basically saying that it's likely between these 3 APs, and based on the signal strength received from all of them, the client is there. Whereas Bluetooth, we can provide far more accurate data, okay, because we have this dedicated scanning radio on board. So we can actually, I think the margin for error on Wi-Fi clients is between 3 and 10 meters. And the BLE side is between 1 and 3 meters. But we can get that down the more APs that you have. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back to my slides for a second here. So
I've just seen
final kind of
Peter
section I
has
wanted
his
to talk
hand
about.
up, Tom.
Oh,
I
sorry,
don't know,
go
do you
on.
want to deal with questions as you go or just at the end? I've just seen that Peter has his hand up.
Yeah, go for it. We can answer a few questions now.
Yeah, hi Tom. The Bluetooth feature, thanks for covering that. I read up about how that helps improve the whole kind of location analytics, not the heat map side of things as well. Really interesting stuff. Now, because Bluetooth has a shorter range, and let's say you wanted to look at, space utilization, in a retail park, for example, or shopping precinct, that type of thing, that suggests itself that you'd need more Merakis to do this accurately. So my question to you is, do all the Meraki product lines support Bluetooth, including the newer Meraki Go, I think it's called? Do they support Bluetooth?
The Meraki Go is a slightly different product line. Okay, so that's more of the for smaller businesses that just have a very basic requirement for like Wi-Fi and connectivity. So they don't have the dedicated scanning radios on. Okay, whereas the Meraki kit that you'll be familiar with, all of the APs have this dedicated scanning radio, which includes the separate BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy radio in there as well. Now, it's an important point, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, right? So BLE by default has a lower or kind of weaker signal. What's the words I'm trying to find?
Yeah, okay. So I kind of get that. But I suppose my next question is then, what's the most basic MR model, if it is the MR series, that, on condition that the area we're trying to cover isn't massively dense, so so you couldn't justify maybe investing in an MR86, for example. What is the most basic model that you offer that supports the Bluetooth part of this?
Yeah, so in terms of an outdoor, is it an outdoor application you'd be looking at, I guess?
Yeah, well, the question is outdoor and indoor, to be honest. I'm just interested in, which one would, would potentially partners should be looking for. Whether is that the MR76, for example, or is there another model?
Yeah, so the MR76 is obviously one of the outdoors, but we've introduced a couple of new ones at a slightly lower price point. So the MR78 and the MR28
Okay.
are kind of our lowest towards the lower end of the portfolio.
Okay.
And so you can have a look at these, but all of the APs that you'll see here on the models page have that BLE capability on them.
Perfect.
Right?
That's great.
So it's not limited to any particular model. We don't just make it available on the higher ends. So one of the things that's just come to mind, yes. So if you are wanting to, and another use case, so I worked with a hospital a few years ago that had these smart tags, like the alarm tags that you wear around your neck, and they use Bluetooth, right? But as a result, we ended up using a lot more of the lower end APs. So it was a predecessor to the 78. They were using the MR70s and MR20s. But that we were able to justify that because of the lower cost. We basically just used those as sensors, as I was saying, like with the camera before, right? So we weren't advertising Wi-Fi off them, we're just using them as data collectors. And then they had some more access points, such as the MR30 series, that were more fit for purpose for like serving clients on Wi-Fi.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So the API, okay, so a lot of customers or a lot of individuals, they're at different kind of stages of either using the API or just getting to grips with it. So some customers I speak to have never used kind of an API to integrate with a network monitoring solution. such as Meraki dashboard. You know, they might be using different tools to monitor their infrastructure, or they might just be using the Meraki dashboard itself if they're a sole Meraki customer. Now, what the API allows you to do, as I alluded to earlier, is pull out all of the data that you see in dashboard. Okay, and so we have a lot of reasons why you might want to do this. So whether this is integration with a third party that's providing a service. So there's different types of the API which we can come on to, such as the scanning API, which is more applicable here. So that's taking data from the location analytics that we've seen in dashboard. One of the benefits is that we can actually do real-time streaming of that data, okay, and present that in a way, you know, as I'll show you that I've done in a lab environment. I've created what's called a Grafana dashboard utilizing open source tools. But if you wanted to create a very simple interface where you're just displaying information rather than having to load a dashboard, which, you know, plainly speaking, shows data that might be 30 seconds to a minute old, you can get more of a real-time view. So as I said, there's a lot of use cases that we can cover via the API, and I'll give you one example next of a partner that provides an off-the-shelf solution. So the API in general is open for all to use. There's no cost associated with it. You can simply go and get started. There obviously is some kind of programming knowledge needed, but we have, if you go ahead and Google Cisco Meraki API, that it will take you to a site, or one of the first links will take you to a site called developer.cisco.com, and that will show you in kind of a more user-friendly way on some of the data that you can extrapolate from the dashboard, and how that data then can be transferred or integrated with other solutions. So there's everything in here from location analytic data to custom splash pages with different Wi-Fi providers, and all of these things that you see on here as well that are kind of off-the-shelf solutions. Now, I'll call out one of them because we have something called the Meraki Marketplace. Now, the Meraki Marketplace is basically a site that you can go to, and it is listed, or is filled with partners that have listed their custom applications that have been kind of approved by the Meraki PM teams. And so customers can go in here and buy these integrations for their very specific use cases. Now, it doesn't fit everybody, because some people might just want to get a couple of bits of information out of dashboard that may be such as your use case here. But one of the things, one of the partners that we work with is a company called EveryAngle, and they built a dashboard here that is really very clever. And I'm just waiting to get a demo of this, and there will be a demo open for everyone to view in the future, and I can definitely keep you updated with that. But they do lots of really cool things, from cell phone detections. They can detect spillages, unauthorized bags, suspicious behavior. So if I break some of those things down and how they can apply to various different use cases. So if we think of the unauthorized bags as one, so this can be applicable in any kind of environment, whether it's an office, whether it's an airport, or whether it's a street on a town center, right? So if you are identifying a bag, or strictly speaking, any object that has been left in a certain location, depending on the environment, that can be viewed as a security risk or just an eyesore. For example, you know, if it's a load of rubbish bags, for example. So what they did is they were using our API to pull all of the data out using the Meraki access points and the Meraki cameras, obviously to identify things like the bags and spillages. And they were able to take that information and put it through their AI model, and pick up things that are important to that customer. So that could be things like bags. You might have different use cases for it, right? And I'm sure you might have things at the top of your head that you might want to identify across different streets. But this could also be, you know, things like crowds in a certain area. You know, if I was thinking more of a retail standpoint, right? If we had a queue of people queuing for a particular stall, or to get to a particular shop, to get to a particular till, whatever that might be, we might want to alert someone to that situation, right? And in the case of that being in a shop, you know, that might be sending an alert to get someone else on another till, for example. In the case of a spillage, then obviously sending someone to clean that up. And then the suspicious behavior is kind of an interesting concept, and it's kind of, how do you define suspicious behavior? So in a town centre environment, that could be individuals lurking around a restricted area, for example, behind a building, whatever that might be. And that can be used, and that data can be extrapolated from the APs, not just from the cameras, right? Because we can use the location data and actually create kind of a virtual field of interest, right? To say, well, users should be in this area, but they shouldn't be in this area. And other things that we can see on this example dashboard, and obviously this was created for manufacturing, as I said, but things like the entrances, the movement on different aisles, but we also think of other use cases, right? So we can also identify groups of users, as I've already said, but if we take that further, groups of users at different times of the day. So if you think about how that data could be useful, you could use that to see the journey that people are taking around a particular area. And if we should open up a different route or try and encourage people to go a different way. An obvious use case that comes to mind around that is COVID and one-way systems, but I'm sure that you've got individual use cases that you can think of as well. Now, just to kind of show you one of the things that many times when I show this, customers kind of like this concept, because a lot of the time they just want to show certain pieces of information in one single place, and perhaps have it running in an office somewhere, or just available for people to view if they go to a particular website, and they just want all of that data in one place. And so what I've done here is created a dashboard extrapolating data, from my own dashboard, presenting all of that data in one single view. So we can see here in a big panel here, I've got the number of active clients at this time, and I'm looking over the last 15 minutes, but this is a live feed. Okay, so this is subject to change. So there's only 2 of us in this house at the moment, but I know, for example, I've got IoT devices, I've got VC devices and all of that kind of good stuff, and you can see that's just changed as well as some devices go to sleep and all of that kind of stuff as well. But the other things on here that are going to be particularly useful, because things like other integrations that I've mentioned, so you might have other smart enabled, and when I say smart enabled, that's kind of a loose term, right? But if you've got other data points, so that could be things like temperature, door sensors, other camera systems, whatever it might be, you could start to use this tool, or any tool really, to collate that data and present it in this way. So you see I've got a series of temperature sensors here, along with door sensors, and I've also got a wireless latency panel. Now, one thing, if you're offering Wi-Fi service to the public, one question that often gets asked in any kind of wireless situation, we're talking a lot to customers about, their challenges on going wireless first, right? Because everyone now, since the inception of kind of COVID and going remote working, now we're seeing a lot of individuals that were based in the office that might have had fixed desktop PCs. Now they have laptops, and so now everyone's transitioned to using wireless. But that can apply to any use case. And so it's, how do you measure whether the wireless is performing well? Okay. And so one of the metrics that we can use and pull out of dashboard in a live fashion is things like latency, data rates, and even an overall client performance score that we generate for you based on all of the metrics. And so I'm presenting this just so we can have a live view if there are any problems in the wireless environment. Anything that I've showed you today in the location analytics section in dashboard can be put in here. So whether that's things like dwell time, whether that is the live heat map data in terms of how many clients are connected to a certain access point or around a certain access point at any time, that can be exported as well. And then I have some general information around WAN uplinks, and then I also have a cost panel. Okay, so I run a server at home, and this is how much it's currently costing me to run a server, but this can be applied in a much wider context. So we're obviously talking a lot as well around sustainability. So one of the things that we're doing with a lot of customers at the moment is, well, how do we reduce carbon footprint? Obviously, there is an element of cost savings with the current climate, all of that, and all of that kind of stuff as well. And Meraki is very, very well suited to do this because we can pull power data out of the dashboard as well. So you could theoretically go in and pull all of the data from all of your access points, cameras, switches, whatever you have in there, and calculate how much that service is costing you to run. But you could go one step further, and you could, one of the things that is quite common to do is to power off access points at a certain time of the day. Now, if you're doing location analytics, that's a non-starter, right? Because you want that running 24/7. However, if you just allow me to kind of explain, if you take an average access point that might consume on average 7 to 9 watts of power, if you can imagine, as that's kind of expanded out over hundreds or thousands of access points, that translates into real pounds and shillings, right? In terms of how much energy is being drawn. And so what we can do is use this platform to automate the provisioning of power in terms of shutting down APs at a certain time of the day, or even down to perhaps shutting down the SSIDs that are being advertised, because that will essentially shut down some of the client serving radios. Okay, so from a sustainability standpoint, there's a lot to think about as well. I'm conscious of time, and like I said, just before I kind of hand over for any Q&A, I know this is kind of being quite high level. I'm more than happy if anyone, I would encourage kind of feedback to this session, right? And if there's anything more that you want to see at a deeper level, you know, if there's something, you know, you might want help with configuration, for example, you know, I'm more than happy to run a kind of more deep dive session on configuration and getting started. Peter, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you. That's very interesting. So I have a question with the API. What's the kind of, I suppose it's difficult for you to answer, but if you just want to not use something like Grafana and integrate it into Google Docs, for example, is that something that you can do? Is it relatively straightforward?
Yeah, in fact, I'll see if this is still available, because we actually did have, yeah, so here you go, Meraki dashboard reports with Google Sheets, right?
Okay, so you can do that. Okay, brilliant. So I can take what's behind my question is, if I wanted to graph, or if I wanted to provide my local community council with instant access to footfall data for the location analytics part of the Meraki, but I don't want to give them access because it might scare them. So instead, I'd like to just create a very simple Google Docs chart showing the latest footfall data, and they can understand that because they click on the link and it takes them there. You know, it can be public, so no password required, that type of thing. So that you're saying is possible, straightforward to do. I can see the link there. Thank you.
That top link, what this allows you to do is create this native integration, and what you can even set Google Docs to do is just refresh the script, right? So you could create a very simple template in here that shows, you know, number of connected clients or number of clients seen, and then that could update every 5 minutes or something.
Okay, and that's free, or do I have to pay an extra license for that?
No extra license. It's free. It's available.
So I could have that charting data, you know, in almost real time from one of my Merakis.
Yep.
Okay, that's really good to know. And then the other question I have, conscious of time, so apologies if I come across a bit rude trying to rush on to the next one, but the Meraki camera, the MV72X, is it possible? I know you can count lorries and cars and people on that model, but can you also count bicycles? Because I understand there's been some new developments on a certain camera model, which allows you to count bikes as well. But I was just wondering whether the MV72X, which is an outdoor, very robust model, and I've got a small number of these units coming to me from a legacy project, and we're quite interested in repurposing them to count many vehicles, not just bikes, for transport planning purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the new enhancements that we did, so you're quite right, in dashboard at the moment, one of the first things we did from an AI perspective is the ability to highlight what is a human, what is a car, all of that kind of stuff. When it comes to people, we do people recognition, not facial recognition. It's an important kind of distinction. But what we now enable you to do is upload your own what's called computer vision model. So now, if you care about bikes and bicycles, you can upload basically a pre-package. You can just Google a computer vision model. All it is hundreds and thousands of pictures of different types of bikes from different angles, and then that will allow you to kind of detect those things that you care about. We've seen it at I attended Cisco Live earlier this year. And one of the things I saw people doing there in a retail setting that was going to be rolled out, I think it was in Germany, they were using it to identify different types of drinks on shelves, right? So you can pretty much do whatever you want to with that mechanism.
So in a rural setting, where we might have cars, buses, people, bikes, we also have sheep. So are you saying that we'd be able to count sheep amongst the bikes as well?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think that that depends on basically you're then getting into the realms of because you can only update one or upload one CV model per kind of deployment. So you would have to kind of group those together in order to detect bikes and sheep, right? But we even have now what we've done is we have our own dedicated IoT team. So if you wanted to, I can plug you into them, and they can talk to you about how to get that off the ground and running. And because you've got these cameras already, they'll be able to help you out very quickly.
Okay, and yeah, just a final follow up on that. If you don't want the cameras used to record images of anybody or anything, sheep, human, whatever, but you're just wanting the data, that's it, you're just wanting to know, are you able to disable the kind of imagery bit, so for privacy sensitive installations?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do a few different things. So you can disable recording altogether, and you can create what we call privacy windows as well. So if there's a certain area, so I'll just try and show you very, very quickly. I'm conscious of everyone's time. Cameras in here. So I'll just click on a random camera. I'm not sure which one this is. So you can see, actually, this is a good example. So these are privacy windows. So if you've got certain areas within the image that you don't want people seeing, so it's common in office environments, but that could also be things like roads, houses, all of that kind of stuff. And then, as I said, you can disable the recording altogether and then just use it as a sensor. So what that allows you to do is we have something called MV Sense, which is basically the model that you're referring to. So we have the object detection model and the custom CV, as I mentioned earlier. So then you could just use something like MQTT or the API to be alerted when there is a sheep in a particular area, for example, or the number of sheep.
Okay, no, thank you. But if you didn't want to, okay, but for the bike counting element, then, I'll leave the sheep for now. Does that data still come up on the Meraki dashboard, or do you need some extra plugin for that?
I see what you're saying. No, so that will fall under the analytics section.
Okay,
I believe.
just checking.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Chris Edwards from the Vale of Morgan Council. We've had a number of footfall units installed in our town centres, But what I'm finding is, although I go into the individual footfall unit in each of the town centres, it seems to be aggregating across the whole of the Vale of Glamorgan rather than giving me individual footfall results for each of the town centres.
Mhm. So what I suspect that is, Chris, is, let me just do this again. So two things I would say to that. By default, it might be aggregated. You can select your individual network up here. Is this something you're doing already?
Right, yeah.
So you can select your individual network. So I suspect what you're doing is something like all networks, and then that will aggregate it, right? So you can see this is across all of our
Unclick
offices.
that and,
Yeah, click on specific network
right, okay.
and then select your period of time in there as well.
Yeah, I think I can help with your query, Chris. We can take it offline. I think when we allocated your Merakis,
Yeah,
we obviously weren't cited on specifically where they were going. But what you can do is create an individual network for those said locations and then transfer each Meraki across to those locations, those network names, and then you can have a look at the data individually.
right.
And that'll go back, I believe, to when they were first installed, which was probably a few months ago now.
Yeah. We are looking to install 4 new ones now in the new year, so I don't know if it's best to wait until all the 8 are installed before we do that.
Yeah, is that okay, Tom? Do you think it's like we can go back and create a network within, you know, his Chris's existing network, and then just move the asset across then, so that he's getting that? Because I've seen it. I think I've done it once before. I think I did it with Kiki when we installed a couple of indoor Merakis.
Yeah, you can do that. Just be mindful of what you're saying. If you're talking about moving devices between networks, you will lose the historic data.
Right. Okay.
But at the moment, obviously, it's not much use because it is, you know, someone from Barrytown Centre said, "Oh, can we have an overview of footfall now with the recent Christmas markets and Christmas activities?" Well, we can't really give them that at this moment in time.
Is there any way that you'd be able to download the data before you recreated the network so that you could go back and get that information out of it? Or is that
Yeah, good point, Kiki. So as I showed you earlier, you can actually download it in CSV format, so you have that local log. So you could do that for, you know, whichever time period up to the last month or 30 days, and then move it across, and then it will start from afresh, essentially.
Okay, great. So that might be something to look into. Thank you. I had a question as well about, I was interested in what you were saying about the passers-by and visitors, because we've been doing a trial for shops to actually be able to see what their conversion rate is of the passers-by into visitors.
Yep.
So I just wondered if you had any data on how accurate that is.
So we can provide accuracy data based on your individual network, right? So as I said, so what you'll see is that there's a few different variables depending on the location of the AP and all of that kind of stuff. Now, generally, when we're talking about Wi-Fi clients, the limiting factor is usually the phone in general, right? So if you are seeing a client via the access point, i.e. it's coming up in your location analytics, they are close enough to your store to be able to be recognized. When we talk about them just passing by, as I said, that is just a strictly someone who's walked by. When we talk about visitors, that is someone that's been there for, I think it's more than 4 to 5 minutes, if that makes sense. So that's when they are deemed as a visitor. So then you could infer your conversion rate, essentially just do a simple math between passers-by and visitors and create a percentage, right, on your conversion rate.
Yeah. Do you know though what distance they would have to be at? Like, because obviously, because we tried it in 2 different shops, and
Mhm.
like where the AP is obviously has a big difference, doesn't it? So if it's by the window, you're not going to get. Do you have any guidance on like how to set that up to be its most accurate, or would it just be a case of trial and error?
So because it comes down to physics at that point, right?
Yeah.
So usually what I would say is if you are wanting to get that level of data for that use case, is work with someone like myself. I'm more than happy to kind of assist with that. But what we would kind of need is a kind of rough idea of the size of the shop in general, what it looks like around there. If it's just, on a high street, for example, what the foot flow of people around the store is, if you see what I'm saying, from the outside, and the location of the AP within in the store as well. Because if you've got an AP, for example, that is bang in the middle, that's always going to be your best bet. Whereas, like you said, if you have one near the window, what we do recommend for people or customers that have multiple APs is we can stop the location analytics from the one nearer the window, because that will skew your kind of figures in terms of what you're looking for conversion rates. So yeah, it's more of a political response if it depends, but we can try and advise you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool. I've got to jump, but please feedback through. Is it okay if everyone feeds back through you, Kiki, if they want to see anything else?
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. This has been really interesting, and I'm sure informative to everybody. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
No
thanks,
worries at
Tom.
all. No worries at all, guys. Like I say, have a think. If you think about anything that you want to see more of, happy to do these on kind of maybe even like a quarterly forum if you want to do something like that.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously we'll need rely on your feedback for suggestions on content.
Brilliant. I know there's a couple that weren't able to make it today as well, so I'm sure they'd be pleased to know if we could do a follow-up. And we'll share the video as well with people that weren't allowed to join, so that then we'll have a better idea of what people would like to find from the next one.